I thought I had the perfect life, a thriving security business, a beautiful fiancée, and a son I'd die for. The wedding was 3 days away when I accidentally overheard a conversation that shattered everything I believed about my family. What I discovered that night didn't just break my heart. It destroyed my entire world and left me questioning if anything in my life had ever been real. My name is Craig Patterson. I'm 47 years old, and until 2 months ago, I thought I had it all figured out. I run a security systems business here in Denver. Been installing and maintaining alarm systems for 15 years now. It's honest work, pays the bills, and gives me the satisfaction of knowing I'm helping people protect what matters to them. The irony of that statement isn't lost on me now. I've always been the kind of guy who believes in doing right by people. My dad taught me that a man's word is his bond, and I've lived by that principle my whole life. Maybe that's why what happened hit me so hard. When someone you trust completely betrays that trust, it doesn't just hurt, it shakes the very foundation of who you are. Michelle and I had been friends for over 12 years before anything romantic happened between us. We met through mutual friends at a backyard barbecue back in 2012. She was 38 then, had just gotten out of a messy relationship, and wasn't looking for anything serious. I was coming off my own divorce, caught my ex-wife cheating with her personal trainer, if you can believe that cliche, so I wasn't exactly jumping to get back into the dating scene either. What I liked about Michelle was how easy it was to talk to her. No games, no drama, just straight conversation. She worked as a medical receptionist at a family practice downtown, had her head on straight, seemed to have her priorities figured out. We'd grab coffee sometimes, catch a movie, nothing heavy. Just two people who'd been burned before, taking things slow and enjoying each other's company. For years, that's all it was, friendship. Pure and simple. I'd help her move apartments. She'd come to my company's holiday parties as my plus one when I needed someone to talk to who wasn't trying to sell me something. We had boundaries, and we respected them. Neither of us wanted to mess up a good thing by complicating it with romance. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It was a Tuesday evening in March 2022 when everything shifted. I remember because I'd just finished installing a new alarm system at a mansion up in Cherry Hills Village. One of those jobs that pays well, but takes forever because the homeowner keeps changing their mind about sensor placement. I was beat, looking forward to a beer and some mindless television. My phone rang just as I was pulling into my driveway. Michelle's name popped up on the screen, and something in my gut told me this wasn't going to be a casual call. Her voice sounded different when I answered, strained, like she'd been crying. "Craig, are you home?" Michelle asked, her words coming out rushed and shaky. "Just pulled in." "What's wrong?" I said, already heading toward my front door. I need someone to talk to. Can I come over? I know it's late, but I don't have anywhere else to go." Now, in all the years I'd known Michelle, she'd never sounded this desperate. Sure, we'd both had our share of rough days, but she was usually the type to handle her problems on her own. Something serious was going down. Of course. "Come on over," I told her. She showed up about 20 minutes later, and the moment I saw her face, I knew this was bad. Her eyes were red and puffy, mascara smudged, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. I'd seen her upset before, but never like this. I didn't push for details right away. Sometimes people need to find their own way to the words. I made us some coffee, and we sat in my living room while she gathered herself. When she finally started talking, it all came pouring out. Her boss at the medical practice had been making her life hell for months. Sexual harassment disguised as mentoring, threats about her job security if she didn't play along, the whole disgusting playbook that predators use. She'd been trying to handle it professionally, document everything. But that day he'd cornered her in the supply room and made it clear that her silence wasn't optional anymore. "I don't know what to do, Craig," Michelle said, her voice breaking. "I need this job. I can't afford to just quit, but I can't keep dealing with this either." Listening to her describe what she'd been going through made my blood boil. This woman I cared about had been suffering in silence, trying to protect herself, while some piece of garbage with a medical degree thought he could abuse his power. I wanted to drive over to that clinic and have a very direct conversation with her boss, but I knew that wouldn't help Michelle's situation. We talked for hours. I listened while she cried, helped her think through her options, reminded her that none of this was her fault. By the time we looked at the clock, it was past midnight. "I should call an Uber," Michelle said, but she didn't make any move toward her phone. Don't be ridiculous. It's late, you're exhausted, and frankly, you shouldn't be alone tonight. Take my bed, I'll crash on the couch. That's when she looked at me with those tear-stained eyes and said something that changed everything between us. Craig, would you just hold me tonight? I don't want to be alone, but I also don't want to be by myself, if that makes sense. What happened that night between Michelle and me wasn't something either of us planned. We held each other, talked until dawn, and somewhere in those quiet hours, the friendship we'd carefully maintained for 12 years shifted into something deeper. It felt natural, like we'd been heading toward this moment all along without realizing it. But life is a way of throwing you curveballs just when you think you've got things figured out. 2 months later, I was finishing up a security installation at a corporate office downtown when my phone rang. Michelle's name on the screen made me smile. We'd been spending more time together since that night, taking things slow but steady. Hey, beautiful. How's your day going? I answered, stepping away from the control panel I was programming. There was a long pause before she spoke, and when she did, her voice sounded different. Strained. Craig, I need to tell you something. Are you somewhere you can talk privately? The tone made my stomach drop. I walked outside of my van, closing the door behind me. What's going on, Michelle? You're scaring me. I'm pregnant. Those 2 words hit me like a physical blow. I sat there in my van, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what she just said. Pregnant. At 47, I'd pretty much given up on the idea of having kids. My ex-wife and I had tried for years before things fell apart, and I'd convinced myself that ship had sailed. Craig, are you there? Michelle's voice brought me back to the moment. Yeah, I'm here. I'm just processing. Are you sure? I took 3 tests, all positive. I went to the doctor this morning to confirm. My mind was racing through a dozen different emotions at once. Shock, fear, excitement, responsibility. They all hit me simultaneously. But one feeling rose above the others. Determination. Okay, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Okay, what do you want to do? I'm keeping it, Craig. I know we haven't talked about this possibility, and I know it's not what either of us planned, but I'm 38 years old. This might be my only chance to be a mother. The resolve in her voice told me she'd already made her decision, and honestly, I respected her for it. Michelle had always been decisive when it mattered, one of the things I admired about her. Then we're doing this, I said without hesitation. Together. You don't have to feel obligated, Craig. I can handle this on my own if you're not ready. I got my back up. Michelle might have been independent, but I wasn't the kind of man who walked away from his responsibilities. My father had raised me better than that. Michelle, listen to me carefully. I'm not going anywhere. If you're having my child, then we're a team. Period. End of discussion. I could hear her crying softly on the other end of the line. I was so scared to tell you, she admitted. You never have to be scared to tell me anything. We're in this together now, all the way. The next few months flew by in a blur of doctor's appointments, baby books, and late-night conversations about everything from nursery colors to college funds. Michelle moved in with me during her second trimester. It just made sense from both a practical and emotional standpoint. Watching her body change, seeing the ultrasound images of our son growing inside her, changed something fundamental in me. I thought I understood responsibility before, but this was different. This was about building something that would last long after I was gone. I threw myself into preparing for fatherhood with the same methodical approach I used for security installations. I read every parenting book I could get my hands on, baby-proofed the house, and started putting money aside for his future. At 47, I wasn't going to be one of those young dads who could chase their kid around the playground for hours, but I was going to be the kind of father who provided stability and security. You're going to wear out that crib by adjusting it so many times, Michelle said one evening, watching me check the assembly for the 3rd time that week. I want everything perfect for him, I replied, tightening another bolt. This little guy deserves the best start we can give him. Michelle smiled, rubbing her rounded belly. He's lucky to have you as a father, Craig. Not every man would have stepped up the way you did. When Jake was born on a snowy December morning, I understood what people meant when they talked about love at first sight. The moment the doctor placed that tiny, red-faced baby in my arms, something clicked into place inside me. This was my son, my responsibility, my legacy. Hello there, little man, I whispered to him as he gripped my finger with his impossibly small hand. I'm your dad, and I'm going to take care of you no matter what. Michelle was exhausted but glowing as she watched us together. "He looks like you," she said softly. I couldn't see much resemblance in that wrinkled little face, but I didn't care. He was ours, and that was all that mattered. The first year of Jake's life was the hardest and most rewarding time I'd ever experienced. Sleepless nights, diaper changes, teething, first steps, all of it was new territory for me, but I loved every minute of it. Even when I was running on 3 hours of sleep and my fourth cup of coffee, coming home to see Jake's face light up when I walked through the door made every challenge worth it. I expanded my business, taking on bigger contracts to ensure we had financial security. Michelle stayed home with Jake, and watching her bloom as a mother was almost as amazing as watching him grow and develop his own little personality. By Jake's first birthday, I knew exactly what I wanted to do next. Jake's first birthday party was a small affair. Just Michelle, her sister Karen, and a few close friends at our house. Watching my son smash cake in his face while everyone laughed and took pictures, I felt this overwhelming sense of completeness. This was my family, and I wanted to make it official. I've been thinking about proposing for months, but I wanted to do it right. At 47, I wasn't about to get down on one knee in some restaurant or make a big public spectacle. This was about Michelle and me, about the life we'd built together, about the future we were planning for Jake. The ring had been sitting in my sock drawer for 3 weeks. I'd spent more money on it than I'd ever spent on anything except my house and my truck. But Michelle deserved something special. She'd given me the greatest gift of my life, my son, and I wanted her to know how much that meant to me. 2 weeks after Jake's birthday, I found my moment. It was a quiet Sunday evening. Jake was down for the night, and Michelle was curled up on the couch reading one of her medical journals. She looked beautiful in the soft lamplight, completely relaxed and content. "Michelle," I said, sitting down beside her, "I need to ask you something." She looked up from her journal, smiling. "What's on your mind?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the ring box, watching her expression change from curiosity to surprise to something that looked like joy. "I know we didn't plan any of this," I said, opening the box to reveal the diamond ring inside. "But somewhere along the way, you and Jake became everything I never knew I needed. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to be Jake's father, not just because of biology, but because we choose to be a family. Will you marry me, Michelle?" She stared at the ring for a long moment, tears welling up in her eyes. Then she looked at me with that smile that at first made me fall for her. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Craig. I want to marry you." I slipped the ring on her finger, and she threw her arms around me, laughing and crying at the same time. It felt like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. "I love you," she whispered against my ear. "I love you too," I replied, meaning it more than I'd ever meant anything in my life. We started planning the wedding immediately. Nothing too elaborate. We were both too old for fairy tale nonsense, but something meaningful. We set the date for late spring, giving us time to plan properly, and for Jake to be old enough to toddle around at the reception. Michelle's sister Karen was thrilled to help with the planning, and honestly, having her around made the whole process easier. She had strong opinions about flowers and venues and catering, which took the pressure off me and Michelle to make decisions about things we didn't particularly care about. The months leading up to the wedding were some of the happiest of my life. Business was good, Jake was growing and developing his personality, and Michelle and I were building something solid together. I felt like I'd finally figured out what I was supposed to be doing with my life. Karen had been staying with us for 2 weeks to help with the final wedding preparations. She was a good house guest, helpful with Jake, pitched in with cooking and cleaning, and generally made herself useful without getting in the way. Having her around actually made everything easier. The wedding was just 3 days away, and I was feeling more confident than ever about the decision Michelle and I had made. We'd found our rhythm as a family, and making it official felt like the natural next step. That evening, I'd gone for my usual walk around the neighborhood. It was something I'd started doing after Jake was born, a way to clear my head and get some exercise after spending most of my day hunched over security panels and wiring. The fresh air and quiet time helped me think through problems and plan for the next day. When I got back to the house, I decided to use the back door instead of the front. No particular reason. Maybe I wanted to check on a garden Michelle had been working on, or maybe I just felt like changing my routine. Sometimes the smallest decisions end up changing everything. I was about to open the door when I heard voices from the kitchen. Michelle and Karen were talking, and something in their tone made me pause. They sounded serious, intense in a way that made me instinctively listen closer. "He's been incredible through all of this," Michelle was saying. "But I can't shake the feeling that I'm living a lie, Karen. He chose this life thinking Jake was his son. He deserves to know the truth." My blood turned to ice. I stood frozen on my own back porch, my hand halfway to the door handle, trying to process what I'd just heard. "Michelle, you can't tell him now," Karen replied, her voice urgent. "You're getting married in 3 days. Jake thinks of him as his father. Craig loves that boy like he's his own blood. What good would it do to destroy all of that? But what if he finds out some other way?" Michelle's voice was getting higher, more strained. "What if Jake gets sick and needs medical tests? What if someone from back then sees us together and says something? I accidentally heard what I never wanted him to know, and now I'm terrified he'll accidentally hear what I never meant for him to know." The words hit me like a physical blow. Jake wasn't my son. The child I'd been raising for almost 2 years, the boy I'd fallen in love with from the moment he was born, wasn't biologically mine. Michelle had let me believe I was his father for nearly 2 years, and she'd been planning to take that secret to her grave. I stood there in the darkness, my entire world shifting beneath my feet. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my family, about the woman I was supposed to marry in 3 days, all of it was built on a lie. "He'll never find out," Michelle said finally. "And even if he did, it wouldn't change how much he loves Jake. Craig isn't the type of man who would abandon a child he's raised just because of genetics." "But shouldn't that be his choice to make?" Karen asked quietly. "It's too late for choices," Michelle replied. "We're a family now. Some truths are better left buried." I turned away from the door and walked back into the darkness, my mind reeling with the implications of what I'd just heard. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my truck in the driveway until nearly 3 in the morning, trying to process what I'd overheard. When I finally went inside, I moved through the house like a ghost, checking on Jake in his crib, looking at Michelle sleeping peacefully in our bed, trying to reconcile the life I thought I was living with the truth I'd accidentally discovered. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in over 2 years. Michelle assumed I was coming down with something and fussed over me, bringing me coffee and offering to reschedule some of the wedding preparations. The irony of her caring for me while hiding such a massive secret made my stomach turn. "I'm going to run some errands," I told her after breakfast. "Wedding stuff. Want to surprise you." She smiled and kissed my cheek. "You're so thoughtful, Craig. Jake and I are lucky to have you." The words that should have made me happy felt like daggers. I drove straight to the pharmacy and bought a paternity test kit, my hands shaking as I paid for it. The cashier was a kid who couldn't have been more than 19, and he looked at me with sympathy. "Everything okay, sir?" he asked. "Just need to be sure about something," I replied, which was probably the understatement of the century. Back home, I waited for my opportunity. Michelle had taken Jake to the pediatrician for his regular checkup, leaving me alone in the house with my thoughts and the test kit. I'd read the instructions a dozen times, but when the moment came, my hands were still trembling. Jake was napping when they returned, and I knew I had to act fast. I crept into his room, watching him sleep peacefully in his crib. He looked so innocent, so trusting. This child had been the center of my world for almost 2 years, and now I was about to find out if everything I believed about him was a lie. The cheek swab took less than 30 seconds. Jake stirred slightly, but didn't wake up. I sealed the sample according to the instructions, filled out the paperwork, and drove to the nearest FedEx office to ship it overnight to the lab. The next 3 days were torture. I went through the motions of wedding preparation, smiled when I was supposed to smile, nodded when vendors asked for approval on flowers or catering details. But inside, I was dying. Every time I looked at Jake, every time Michelle talked about our future together, I felt like I was drowning. "You seem distant," Michelle said the night before our wedding. "Are you having second thoughts?" The question hit me like a slap. If she only knew what I was really thinking about. "Just nervous," I lied. "Big day tomorrow." She snuggled closer to me in bed. "I love you, Craig. Tomorrow is going to be perfect." I lay awake that entire night, staring at the ceiling and wondering if I should call off the wedding. But without the test results, I couldn't be sure of anything. Maybe I'd misunderstood the conversation. Maybe there was an explanation that would make sense of everything. The results came back the morning of our wedding. I checked my email while Michelle was getting her hair done, and there it was in black and white. I was not Jake's biological father. The probability of paternity was 0%. I sat in my truck outside the hair salon, staring at the email on my phone and feeling like my entire life had just imploded. The wedding was in 4 hours. Our guests were already arriving at the venue. Michelle was inside, getting ready to marry a man she'd been lying to for almost 2 years. I called the venue and canceled everything. The flowers, the catering, the music, the whole elaborate production we'd spent months planning. It cost me a fortune in cancellation fees, but money was the least of my concerns at that moment. Then I drove home and waited. Michelle arrived an hour later, her hair perfect, her makeup flawless, wearing the dress she'd bought for our wedding. She looked beautiful and happy and completely unprepared for what was about to happen. "Craig, what are you doing here?" she asked, confusion replacing the joy on her face. "The ceremony starts in 2 hours. Why aren't you getting ready?" I handed her my phone with the email, still open on the screen. "Read it." She looked down at the phone, and I watched her face change in real time. The color drained from her cheeks, her eyes widened, and her hands started shaking. "Craig, I can explain." "Can you?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "Can you explain how you let me believe for almost 2 years that Jake was my son? Can you explain how you were planning to marry me today without ever telling me the truth?" She sank into the nearest chair, still wearing her wedding dress, tears streaming down her face. "I was going to tell you," she said weakly. "When? After we were married? After Jake graduated high school? When exactly were you planning to share this little detail with me?" "I was scared," Michelle said, her voice breaking. "You were so happy when Jake was born. You love him so much. I didn't want to ruin that. So you decided to ruin it now instead?" I asked. "You decided to let me find out by accident the night before our wedding?" "You weren't supposed to hear that conversation," she said, looking up at me with desperate eyes. "No, I wasn't. Just like I wasn't supposed to know the truth about my own life, right? Just like I wasn't supposed to have a choice about whether I wanted to raise another man's child." Michelle stood up, her wedding dress rustling as she moved toward me. "But you love him, Craig. You've been his father in every way that matters. Does it really change anything?" That question broke something inside me. The rage I've been holding back for 3 days finally erupted. "Does it change anything?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Michelle, it changes everything. You took away my right to make an informed decision about my own life. You let me plan a future, invest my money, my time, my heart in something that was built on a lie." "But Jake needs you," she pleaded. "He thinks of you as his father." "And whose fault is that? You created this situation, Michelle. You let that little boy bond with me, knowing full well that I wasn't his father. You used my love for him to trap me in a relationship based on deception." She was sobbing now, her perfect wedding makeup ruined. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to pack your things and leave," I said quietly. "Both of you. I want you out of my house, out of my life, and I never want to see either of you again." "Craig, please." "No," I said firmly. "This is over. We're done. There's no coming back from this level of betrayal." Michelle moved out that same day, taking Jake and what felt like the remnants of my shattered life with her. She went to stay with her sister Karen, and for 2 weeks, I heard nothing from either of them. I threw myself into work, taking on every security installation job I could find, trying to exhaust myself enough to sleep at night. Then the papers arrived. A process server showed up at my door on a Tuesday morning, handing me a legal document that made my blood boil. Michelle was suing me for child support. After everything she'd done, after the lies and deception, she had the audacity to demand that I financially support a child who wasn't even mine. I called my lawyer immediately. Tom Brennan had handled my divorce years ago, and he was the kind of straight-talking attorney who didn't sugarcoat bad news. "Craig, I'm going to be honest with you," Tom said after reviewing the papers. "This isn't going to be easy. You signed the birth certificate, which legally establishes paternity in Colorado. The court's primary concern is going to be the child's welfare, not the circumstances of how you ended up in this situation." "But I have DNA evidence," I argued. "Jake isn't my biological son. How can they force me to pay child support for a child that isn't mine?" "Because you've been acting as his father for almost 2 years. The court sees a stable relationship that's been disrupted, and their job is to protect the child's interests, not necessarily yours." The first hearing was a nightmare. Michelle's lawyer painted me as a deadbeat father abandoning his responsibilities. They argued that Jake knew me as his father, that I'd willingly taken on the role, and that my reasons for leaving were irrelevant to the child's needs. I sat there listening to them twist the truth, making me sound like the villain in a story where I was clearly the victim. When my turn came to present evidence, I had Tom lay out everything: the DNA test results, the conversation I'd overheard, the timeline of Michelle's deception. Your Honor, Tom argued, my client was fraudulently induced into believing he was this child's father. He made life decisions, financial commitments, and emotional investments based on false information. To hold him legally responsible for child support under these circumstances would be a grave injustice. But the judge wasn't swayed. Because I'd signed a birth certificate and acted as Jake's father for nearly 2 years, the court ruled that I was legally obligated to continue supporting him. The monthly payments were set at $800, money that would go to supporting a child I'd never see again. I walked out of that courtroom feeling like the system had failed me completely. Not only had I lost the child I'd loved as my own son, but I was now legally required to pay for the privilege of that loss. Tom wasn't finished fighting, though. We're filing an appeal, he told me outside the courthouse. This ruling is based on outdated precedents that don't account for DNA evidence and fraudulent misrepresentation. We're going to take this to a higher court. The appeal process took another 6 months, but this time we had a judge who understood the complexity of the situation. We presented evidence of Michelle's deliberate deception, the DNA results, and the financial impact her lies had on my life. This time, justice prevailed. The appeals court overturned the original ruling, officially removing me from Jake's birth certificate and eliminating my child support obligations. I was finally free from the legal chains of Michelle's deception. The legal victory felt hollow. Yes, I was free from the financial obligations, but the emotional damage was something no court could undo. I'd lost a child I'd loved as my own son, and that grief was something I had to learn to live with. I tried to get back some of the money I'd spent on Jake over the years, the college fund I'd started, the life insurance policies, the countless expenses that came with raising a child. But my lawyer was clear about the limitations. Colorado doesn't recognize paternity fraud as grounds for financial recovery, Tom explained. The courts see it as voluntary spending on your part, regardless of the circumstances that led to it. It was another blow, but by then I'd learned not to expect justice from a system that seemed designed to protect everyone except the men who get deceived. I'd lost nearly $40,000 in direct expenses, not counting the wedding costs and legal fees, but I had to accept that some losses can't be recovered. Michelle tried to contact me several times after the appeal was settled. She left voicemails, sent emails, even showed up at my office once. She wanted to talk, to explain, to somehow make things right between us. But there was nothing left to discuss. The trust that had taken years to build was destroyed completely, and there was no path back from that level of betrayal. I changed my phone number, moved to a different part of Denver, and started fresh. It wasn't easy. I was 47 years old, starting over after having my entire life plan destroyed, but I was determined to rebuild on my own terms. The hardest part was learning to trust again. Michelle's deception had shaken my faith in my own judgment, made me question every relationship and every decision. But time has a way of healing even the deepest wounds, and slowly I began to find my footing again. I expanded my security business, hiring 2 additional technicians, and taking on commercial contracts. Work became my refuge, the one area of my life where I felt completely in control. I was good at protecting other people's homes and businesses, even if I'd failed to protect my own heart. 2 years later, I'm in a better place. I've learned to spot red flags I missed before, to ask the hard questions, to trust my instincts when something feels off. I'm dating again, cautiously but hopefully, with a woman named Sarah who values honesty as much as I do. Do I regret the time I spent with Jake? That's complicated. I loved that little boy with everything I had, and those feelings were real even if the circumstances weren't. But I've learned that love built on lies is like a house built on sand. No matter how beautiful it looks, it can't withstand the storm when the truth comes out. If there's one thing I want other men to take away from my story, it's this: ask the hard questions, even when you don't want to hear the answers. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. And never, ever let someone else's deception define your worth or your future. I'm 49 now, and I'm still learning, still growing, still believing that the best parts of my life are yet to come.